All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to another day of science class. This week we're talking about adaptations, and we have learned that there are two main different types of adaptations, either structural adaptations, which would be parts of your body, like your eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, your fur, your hair, your skin, and your limbs. Or behavioral adaptations are things that animals do, ways that they behave or ways that they act in order to help them survive. So today we're going to focus on another structural adaptation. Our focus for today is noses. So let's talk about animal noses and how they are adapted to help animals survive. First things first, let's ask ourselves, what are noses for? Most obviously, noses are for smelling. Now, not every nose can smell. Not all animals have noses, and not every nose can smell. But most noses are built with receptors that gather scent molecules from the air. That's what smelling is. Noses are also used for finding prey and identifying different types of plants. And that's usually through smelling, through the scent of the prey or the scent of the plant. Some animals also have adaptations that give them special abilities with their noses. So they can use their noses for digging or blowing out water, like dolphins and whales with their blowholes. Or some animals can use their noses for spraying water, like an elephant, for example. What are some other words for nose? So normally when we talk about animal noses, we use the word nose, but you might also hear snout or trunk or beak. Sometimes we also use a slang word like sniffer, or you might hear proboscis, that's a specific type of nose for an insect, or muzzle. So these are all different types of synonyms for nose, and we'll go into a few of these like trunk and beak and proboscis and kind of show you exactly what those mean throughout this lesson. Awesome, so let's pause our video and answer question number 1. What are noses good for? What do noses help us do in the animal kingdom? So you could have said any number of things. Hopefully you included smelling on that list, as that's the primary function of a nose. But you could also say things like finding prey, identifying plants, digging, or spraying water. Great, so let's go into a few specific examples of different animals and how their noses are adapted. Let's start with one of my favorite animals, the elephant. So elephant noses are also called trunks. This is an elephant trunk. And they have very, very powerful noses. They have more smell receptors than any other mammal. So they have more, smell receptors are almost like nerve endings. They're little parts inside of the nose that gather the scent out of the air. So they have more than any other mammal, even more than dogs. They have very powerful muscles all along their trunk. So unlike you and me, they can actually move their noses all around, and they use these trunks to do all sorts of things. Like they can dig in the ground with their trunks. They can lift things with their trunks, like lift logs out of their way or lift their offspring, like help carry their babies. They can spray water with their trunks and wash themselves off or cool themselves down. And they also use their trunks for connection and communication. They can embrace with their trunks, or I've seen elephants wrap their trunks around each other. So they have many, many uses for this powerful nose. And as you can see, it's quite different from ours. How about an aardvark? Have you ever heard of an aardvark or seen one before? This creature lives mostly in deserts and sometimes the savanna or grassland, but mostly in dry areas. So its nose is well adapted to that environment. First of all, it has a great sense of smell. You'll notice this really long snout with these big nostrils at the end. An aardvark is able to smell even underground. So mostly what they eat are ground insects. So as they're walking through the desert, they can smell insects that are working underground. They can smell anthills that are underground. And they can use their long snout for digging into those anthills, kind of snuffling about into the dirt and sand. Now, one cool thing about their long snout is that they have these long hairs on the end of their nose or on the tips of their nostrils that help to block out the dust. Because living in the desert or the grassland, there's lots of dust and dirt, and especially with the aardvark snuffling the ground and sniffing for insects all over the ground, they need some way to not inhale dust all the time. So not only do they have these long hairs on their nose, but they also are able to close up their nostrils. Kind of like the way a polar bear can close up its ears when it goes underwater, an aardvark can do the same with its nostrils. It can squeeze them shut while it's digging in the dirt, and that way it doesn't get dirt and dust all up in its nose and its lungs while it's hunting for its prey. So let's pause our video and go to question number 2. What is one benefit of a long snout? So a benefit is something good, something positive. So what's one positive thing? What's one good thing about having a long nose or a long snout? Awesome. Hopefully you told me something about how a long snout can be helpful to animals, either as a way to dig underground or because it can be used to move things. Or you could also say a long snout allows the animal to have more smell receptors, so they have a greater sense of smell. Awesome. Let's talk about a really weird nose. This is a star-nosed mole, and as you can see, it's named star-nosed because its nose is kind of shaped like a star. This is actually its nose. It has a very weird, fleshy, hairless nose, and what you see are tentacles. There are 22 tentacles all around its nose. And it has thousands and thousands, up to 100,000 nerve endings in its nose. So what that means is that it doesn't use its nose for smelling as much as it's using its nose to feel things. These tentacles move all around, not only to sense the environment and feel what's around the mole, but also to snatch up prey. They are some of the fastest moving tentacles on Earth. And this mole also, similar to the aardvark being able to close up its nostrils, the star-nosed mole is able to kind of close in its tentacles while the mole is digging underground, just to prevent dirt and dust from getting in there. So this is a very, very weird nose. It's not really used for smelling as much as it's used for feeling. And if you can imagine, I know this is just a photo, but go to YouTube and look up videos of star-nosed moles. They're even able to smell underwater because they have very, very powerful noses. But it's weird to see their tentacles moving all around and touching everything at lightning speed. Now let's talk about a bird. This is one of the biggest birds on Earth. It's called an albatross. And albatross noses, obviously, are called beaks. Birds don't really have typical noses. They usually have what we call beaks. And some birds have nostrils on their beaks. Others do not. Some have one nostril, some have two nostrils. But an albatross is lucky. It is known for flying far across the ocean in search of its prey. And because of that, it has adapted to have a really strong sense of smell. Most birds do not have a good sense of smell. Most birds rely on their sight and their sense of touch and feel, and they don't really have a strong sense of smell. Albatross, however, because of their environment and because of the way that they survive by flying many, many miles over the ocean, they have adapted to have an incredibly strong sense of smell. In fact, these birds are able to even track schools of fish underwater as they're flying across the ocean. They can smell the fish that are under the water, and they fly over them and follow them until they can hunt them and dive down for their prey. So they're incredibly good hunters and really, really powerful sense of smell, even though most birds do not have a good sense of smell. So yes, it is a nose, but we call it a beak when it's on a bird. Now let's look at another underwater creature. This is a hammerhead shark, or I should say our first, not another. But this is an underwater creature, a hammerhead shark, and you might be able to tell they have this long, flat head with this nostril on one side and this nostril on the other. So they have two nostrils, one on each side of its long head. And you might think, well, that's kind of weird, but this adaptation is actually really helpful for the shark. What it does is this space between the nostrils creates a long tube inside the head. And as the shark swims, water flows in and out of this tube. So water goes in through their nostrils, and little tiny scent molecules are going into the water in their nose, in their head. And because they're getting so much water through this tube between their nostrils, they're able to detect tiny, tiny, tiny amounts of smell molecules in the water. So they can smell a really, really far distance and smell even the tiniest amount of smell. Now let's talk about two creatures with really strange noses. This is a moth. A moth doesn't have any nostrils. In fact, its nose is not used for smelling at all. Moths and butterflies have noses called a proboscis. Their proboscis is like a long curled up straw. Kind of looks like a little spiral on their face. And it's good for sipping nectar. They can extend the straw and sip deep inside of a flower and then fold their proboscis back up when they're ready to fly away. So the proboscis, their nose, is used for drinking nectar. But how does a moth or a butterfly smell? Well, most insects actually use their antennae. So even though they do have a nose, their nose is not for smelling. They use their antenna on top of their head to smell. So they have smell receptors, just like we do in our noses. They have smell receptors too, just that they are on top of these antennae instead of in their nose. And what about a dolphin? Dolphins have this long snout on the front of their face, but this is not actually their nose. This is more like their mouth. And dolphins don't really have a sense of smell. They don't really have any nostrils. They have a snout that is well shaped for catching their prey, but they don't have nostrils, they don't have any way to collect scent molecules out of the water. So instead, their nose, which they use for breathing, is really called a blowhole. So the blowhole is a little tiny hole on top of their head, which they can use to blow out air, like exhale, and also inhale air from the surface. Remember, mammals have to use their lungs to breathe, and dolphins are mammals, so they don't have gills to breathe underwater. They have to go up to the surface to breathe. So they use their blowhole to do this, and some might call their blowhole kind of like a nostril, one nostril on top of the head, except that it's not able to gather scent or gather smell molecules from the air. It has no scent receptors in its blowhole. So you might call it a nose, but it's not used for smelling. Some might call this part of the dolphin the nose also. But again, it doesn't really have any way to smell. It doesn't have nostrils on it. So it's more of the mouth than the nose. It's the dolphin's jaw, and there are many, many teeth inside of this extended jaw. Okay, so let's pause our video and answer the third and final question. Describe how one animal's nose is adapted to help it survive. We just went through a few different creatures, from the star-nosed mole to the aardvark to the hammerhead shark to the dolphin to a moth to an elephant, and they all have a wide variety of qualities to their noses, from tiny noses to humongous noses, noses with muscles, noses with nostrils that can close and open, noses with wide nostrils, the albatross's beak. There's all these different types and shapes and sizes of noses. Tell me how one animal's nose helps it to survive. Okay, well, I hope you learned something today, something interesting. Again, when we talk about the animal kingdom, sometimes it feels overwhelming to try to cover a topic like this in one day. We barely scratch the surface of all the variety and complexity of the different types of animal noses and animal adaptations on Earth. But what I want to do, and my goal with these lessons, is just to give you a little sample and a little variety of the many different ways that nature adapts and the different creative solutions that nature has for the challenges of the environment. So hopefully you got just a taste, and if you want to learn more, you can always research or ask me questions, or find out, look around, read into it, Google it, explore your curiosities, because there's so much more to learn than what we cover here in class. Okay? All right. Thank you for being here. That is it for today. Now you are ready to go and take your DOL. Good luck, and let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.